AITA for secretly recording my husband's mother after she accused me of stealing her wedding ring? My mother-in-law has always had a way of making me feel like an outsider looking in through a window I'd never be allowed to open. When she announced that she'd lost her grandmother's diamond wedding ring during a family gathering at her house, I knew the accusation would eventually land on me. I was the last person in the kitchen. The one who'd offered to help clear the dishes, the one who didn't quite belong. The ring had been in her family for 3 generations, a symbol of everything I could never truly be part of. My husband believed in me, I knew that much. But his mother's cold stare and the whispers that followed me around the house told a different story. I decided to prove my innocence, but the method I chose would change everything. The first time I met my mother-in-law, I wore a dress I'd spent 3 weeks searching for. It was navy blue with a modest neckline and a hem that fell just below my knees. Practical enough to impress without being flashy. I'd practiced my smile in the mirror, rehearsed polite conversation topics, and prepared myself for the inevitable scrutiny that came with dating her only son. Nothing could have prepared me for the way her eyes traveled slowly up and down my body, cataloging every perceived flaw with a precision that felt almost surgical. "Lovely to finally meet you," she'd said, her voice clipped and cool. "I've heard so much about you." The so much hung in the air like a judgment. I never found out what exactly she'd heard, but the way she said it made me feel like I'd already failed some unspoken test. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of family dinners, holiday gatherings, and tense phone calls. 7 years of trying to earn her approval and watching it slip further away with every attempt. I'd married her son despite her objections, moved into a house she deemed too modest, and started a career she considered unconventional. I'd given birth to 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and even that wasn't enough to bridge the gap between us. She wasn't cruel, not in any obvious way. She never raised her voice or called me names. Instead, she wielded silence like a weapon. Her disapproval expressed through tight smiles and meaningful glances that said everything words couldn't. She'd compliment my cooking while pointedly leaving half her meal untouched. She'd praise my parenting while subtly suggesting that my son's stubbornness must have come from my side of the family. She'd invite me to family gatherings, but make sure I was seated at the far end of the table, as far from her as possible. My husband, a gentle man who loved his mother despite her flaws, always told me to let it slide. "That's just how she is," he'd say with a shrug. "She doesn't mean anything by it. She's old-fashioned, that's all." I'd nod and try to let it go, but the accumulation of small wounds was beginning to take its toll. I'd started dreading family events, my stomach twisting into knots at the mere mention of a Sunday dinner at her house. I'd find excuses to leave early, fake headaches, and urgent work calls that allowed me to escape before the tension became unbearable. The ring incident happened at a Thanksgiving gathering, the kind that brought the entire extended family together in a cacophony of overlapping conversations and clattering dishes. Her house was a sprawling colonial with pristine white walls and furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. She'd spent weeks preparing, polishing silver and arranging flowers, and planning a menu that would have fed an army. I'd arrived early with my husband and children, determined to make a good impression. I'd brought a homemade pie, a recipe I'd perfected over years of trial and error, and presented it with a smile that felt almost genuine. She'd taken it without comment, setting it on the counter alongside the elaborate desserts she'd prepared herself. The day proceeded in the usual fashion. Relatives arrived in waves, filling the house with noise and warmth that somehow never quite reached me. I circulated among them, making small talk, helping where I could, always aware of her eyes following my every move. The children played in the backyard, their laughter drifting through the windows like a promise of simpler times. When dinner was finally served, the table was a masterpiece of autumnal elegance. "We gathered around," said Grace, and began the ritual of passing dishes and complimenting the cook. I'd helped clear the appetizer plates and refill water glasses, moving through the crowd with practiced ease. The ring came up during dessert. She was showing it to my sister-in-law, holding her hand out with the pride of a museum curator displaying a priceless artifact. The diamond was modest by modern standards, but the setting was exquisite, a Victorian filigree that had been passed down through generations. "My grandmother wore this at her wedding in 1923, she announced, her voice carrying across the table. "It's been in the family ever since. It'll go to my eldest granddaughter one day." She looked pointedly at my daughter, who was too busy playing with her mashed potatoes to notice. I felt the subtle exclusion in her words, the reminder that I was merely a vessel for her bloodline, not a true part of it. The gathering wound down in the usual way. Guests said their goodbyes, leftovers were packed into containers, and I found myself in the kitchen helping with the dishes. The familiar clatter of plates and the hum of the dishwasher filled the silence as I scrubbed a particularly stubborn casserole dish. "Thank you for your help," she'd said, her voice polite but distant. "You can go join the others now." I'd dried my hands, smiled, and excused myself. I hadn't touched her ring. I hadn't been anywhere near the jewelry box on her dresser where she kept it. I'd been in the kitchen the entire time, doing dishes and avoiding awkward conversations. The accusation came 3 days later. I was at home, folding laundry and trying to convince my son to eat his vegetables, when my phone rang. It was my husband, his voice strained and apologetic. "Mom called," he said carefully. "She can't find her ring, the one with the diamond filigree setting. She's looked everywhere and she's upset." I stopped folding, my hands frozen mid-motion. "Okay?" What does that have to do with me? She remembers showing it to everyone at Thanksgiving, he continued, his voice growing more hesitant. And she remembers you being in the kitchen after everyone left. She's not accusing you exactly. She's wondering if you might have seen it. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. I felt my face flush, a hot wave of anger rising from my chest. Your mother is accusing me of stealing her ring, I said flatly. That's what this is. It's not an accusation, he insisted. She's just worried. She's elderly, and she's been forgetful lately. She probably just misplaced it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and counted to 10. I'm coming over, I said. We need to talk about this in person. The drive to her house was a blur of anxious thoughts and racing heartbeats. I rehearsed what I'd say, imagined all the ways the conversation could go wrong, and tried to steel myself against the inevitable confrontation. She answered the door with a composed expression that didn't quite mask the suspicion in her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I know this is awkward, but I'm sure you understand why I needed to ask. I followed her into the living room, where my husband was already waiting. The room felt smaller than it had on Thanksgiving, the walls closing in as I sat down on the edge of the sofa. I didn't take your ring, I said, forcing myself to meet her eyes. I've never touched your jewelry. I don't even know where you keep it. She folded her hands in her lap, her expression unreadable. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just thought you might have noticed something. You were in the kitchen, and I remember seeing you near the hallway where my bedroom is. My stomach dropped. I was in the kitchen. I never went near your bedroom? Are you sure? She pressed, her voice soft but pointed. I don't want to cause any problems, but that ring is irreplaceable. It's been in our family for generations. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, tears of frustration and hurt. I'd spent 7 years trying to prove myself to this woman, and she still saw me as a stranger, an interloper, someone capable of theft. I'm sure, I managed, my voice cracking. I'm absolutely sure. The conversation ended with a hollow promise to keep looking and a strained goodbye that left me feeling drained and defeated. I drove home in silence, my husband's hand on my knee, his apologies falling on deaf ears. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Family members started treating me differently, their greetings growing shorter, their smiles more strained. I heard whispers at gatherings, saw sidelong glances that spoke of suspicion. My sister-in-law, normally warm and friendly, became distant and cold. Even my husband's father, a quiet man who'd always been kind to me, seemed to look through me as if I'd become invisible. I told myself it didn't matter what they thought. I knew I was innocent, and that should have been enough, but the isolation was wearing me down, making me question my own sanity. I started to wonder if I'd somehow imagined the whole thing, if maybe I had wandered into her room without remembering it. Then I found the recording device. It was my daughter's old nanny cam, a small, unobtrusive thing I'd used years ago to keep an eye on her nursery. I'd tucked it away in a drawer and forgotten about it until I was cleaning out the linen closet. I held it in my hands, turning it over, and felt an idea begin to form in my mind. I knew my mother-in-law's routine. Every Tuesday afternoon, she had a standing coffee date with her best friend, a woman who lived 2 doors down. Her house would be empty for at least 2 hours, a perfect window of opportunity. I could place the camera somewhere discreet, somewhere she wouldn't notice, and catch her talking to herself or on the phone. Maybe I'd hear her admit she misplaced the ring. Maybe I'd catch her on the phone with someone, confessing she knew I was innocent but didn't want to admit she'd been wrong. The plan was risky, maybe even a little crazy. If she found the camera, she'd have all the proof she needed that I was untrustworthy. But I was desperate. I'd been painted as a thief, and my reputation in the family was crumbling. I had to do something. I executed the plan the following Tuesday. I let myself into her house with the spare key she'd given me for emergencies, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I placed the camera on a bookshelf in the living room, concealed behind a decorative vase. It was small enough to go unnoticed, and I'd positioned it to capture the entire room. I left quickly, my hands shaking, my mind racing with possibilities. For the next 2 hours, I paced my own living room, checking my phone obsessively, waiting for the notification that the camera had captured something useful. When I finally retrieved the device and reviewed the footage, I felt a chill run down my spine. She was alone, her friend having canceled at the last minute. She sat in her armchair, a glass of wine in her hand, and she began to mutter to herself. I can't believe I lost it, she said, shaking her head. I've had that ring for 40 years. 40 years. My heart raced. This was it. She was going to admit she'd misplaced it. Then she spoke again, and the words hit me like a physical blow. But I can't let her think she's gotten away with it. She's always been too good for my son. Too good for our family. I'll make sure everyone knows what she did. They'll all see her for what she really is. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. She didn't believe I'd stolen the ring. She'd lost it herself, and she was using the situation to destroy me. She was willing to let me take the fall for her own mistake, just to get me out of the family. I watched the footage over and over, trying to process what I'd discovered. The woman I'd spent years trying to please had been waiting for a moment like this, a chance to finally push me out, and she'd used a family heirloom to do it. I didn't know what to do next. I could confront her with the evidence, force her to admit the truth. I could show my husband the footage and let him see his mother for who she really was. Or I could keep it to myself, let things play out, and wait for the right moment to reveal what I knew. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I had the power to change everything, but I wasn't sure I was ready to use it. The morning after I watched the footage, I woke up with a knot in my chest that refused to loosen. I went through the motions of my routine, making breakfast for the kids, packing lunches, kissing my husband goodbye as he left for work. Everything looked normal on the surface, but beneath it, I was unraveling. Every smile felt forced, every conversation strained. My husband noticed. Of course he did. We'd been together long enough that he could read my moods like a book, even when I tried to hide them. "Are you okay?" he asked, pausing at the door with his briefcase in hand. "You seem distant." I forced a smile that I hoped looked convincing. "Just tired. The kids were up early this morning." He studied me for a moment, his brow furrowed with concern, but he didn't press. "Call me if you need anything," he said, and then he was gone. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, and felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. I'd never kept anything from him before, not anything significant. We'd built our relationship on honesty and trust, the very things his mother was trying to destroy. And now I was lying to him by omission, carrying a burden that was slowly crushing me. I spent the morning going through the motions, cleaning and organizing and trying to distract myself, but my mind kept circling back to the footage, to the cold calculation in her voice, to the realization that she'd been playing a long game I hadn't even known existed. I replayed every interaction we'd ever had, searching for the moments I'd missed. The times she'd praised me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The gifts she'd given me that felt more like obligations than gestures of affection. The way she'd always managed to make me feel like I was an intruder in my own family. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. I'd spent years trying to earn her approval, bending over backward to make her like me, and all along, she'd been waiting for an opportunity to push me out. The ring was just an excuse, a convenient tool for a woman who'd never wanted me in her son's life. I knew I had to tell my husband. He deserved to know the truth about his mother, even if it hurt him. But I also knew he'd struggle to believe it. She'd spent a lifetime cultivating a persona of perfection, a devoted mother and grandmother who would never intentionally hurt anyone. The woman I'd captured on camera was a stranger to him. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat him down in the living room. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words felt clumsy and inadequate. "I need to show you something," I began, pulling out my phone. "And I need you to promise me you'll watch it all the way through before you say anything." His expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "What is it? What's going on?" "Just promise me," I said, my voice cracking. "Please." He nodded, his jaw tight. I opened the video and handed him the phone. He took it hesitantly, his eyes scanning the screen as the footage began to play. I watched his face as he watched his mother. At first there was confusion, then recognition, then dawning horror as her words sank in. He sat frozen, his knuckles white around the phone, his breathing shallow. When the video ended, he stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down on the coffee table. He didn't look at me. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. I swallowed hard. "I put a camera in your mother's house. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to prove I didn't take the ring." Everyone was looking at me like I was a thief, and I couldn't take it anymore. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples with his fingertips. "You recorded her without her knowledge. That's a violation of her privacy." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it was wrong, but she was destroying my reputation. She was trying to tear our family apart. I had to do something." He was quiet for so long I started to fear the worst. I imagined him walking out, calling his mother, choosing her over me. I imagined my life crumbling into pieces. "Say something," I pleaded. "Please." He looked up at me and I saw tears in his eyes. Tears of anger, of betrayal, of heartbreak. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I don't know how to process this. She's my mother. I've known her my whole life, and I never imagined she could be capable of something like this." "Neither did I said. "But she is, and we need to figure out what to do about it." He shook his head, running his hands through his hair. "What can we do? If we confront her, she'll deny it. She'll say the footage is fake or taken out of context. And if we show it to anyone else, we're the ones who'll look like the bad guys." I recorded her in her own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd set a trap, and I'd walked right into it. Even with proof of her guilt, I was the one who'd end up looking worse. "I know," I said, reaching for his hand, "but we can't let her get away with this. If we do nothing, she'll keep treating me the same way. She'll keep trying to push me out, and eventually, she might succeed." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with mine. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "You're my wife. You're the mother of my children. I chose you, and I'll keep choosing you, no matter what." The words should have comforted me, but they didn't, because even as he said them, I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved me, but he also loved his mother, and asking him to choose between us was the cruelest thing I could imagine. We didn't sleep much that night. We lay in bed, our bodies close, but our minds miles apart. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of what he'd learned pressing down on him. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I didn't know how. The next morning, we made a decision. We'd confront her together as a united front. We'd give her the opportunity to come clean without the threat of exposure. If she admitted what she'd done and apologized, we could move forward. If she didn't, we'd have to decide how far we were willing to take things. We drove to her house in silence. The sky was gray and overcast, matching my mood. Every mile brought us closer to a confrontation I'd been dreading for weeks. She opened the door with a smile that faltered when she saw our expressions. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping aside to let us in. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." We sat down in the living room, the same room where I'd hidden the camera. My husband took a deep breath and began. "Mom, we need to talk about the ring," he said, his voice steady but strained. She stiffened, her smile freezing in place. "What about it? Have you found it?" "No," I said. "But we've found something else." Her eyes flickered to me, a flash of anger quickly suppressed. "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" My husband pulled out his phone, the footage queued up and ready to play. "Mom, I need you to watch this, and I need you to be honest with me." He pressed play and handed her the phone. She took it with trembling hands, her face going pale as she watched herself on the screen. I watched her expression shift from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like despair. When the video ended, she set the phone down slowly, her hands shaking. She didn't look at either of us. She just stared at the floor, her silence more damning than any confession. "Mom," my husband said, his voice cracking, "tell me that isn't what it looks like." She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can explain," she said, her voice small and broken. "I don't know why I said that. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were planning to destroy my wife's reputation," he said, his voice rising. "You were willing to let everyone think she was a thief just because you've never accepted her as part of this family." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She just sat there defeated as the weight of her actions settled over her. I should have felt vindicated. I'd finally exposed her lies, proven my innocence to the one person who mattered most. But all I felt was sadness. Sadness for the family we'd never had, the love we'd never shared, the years of resentment that had led to this moment. "I think we should go," I said quietly, standing up. "We've said what we needed to say." My husband nodded, rising to join me. At the door, I paused and looked back at her. "I never wanted this," I said. "I never wanted to be your enemy, but I also won't let you destroy me. From now on, if we're going to have any kind of relationship, it's going to be on my terms." She looked up at me, her face a mask of regret. But I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out the door, my husband behind me, and didn't look back. We pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, neither of us willing to break the silence. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, and I could hear the distant sound of our neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street. My husband stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I need a minute," he said finally, his voice rough and strained. "I just need to sit here for a minute." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. I understood. He'd just watched his mother's mask crumble, seen the woman who'd raised him reveal a cruelty he'd never suspected. That kind of revelation needed time to settle, time to find a place in the landscape of his memory. We sat in silence for another 5 minutes, the weight of the afternoon pressing down on us. Then he took a deep breath, released the steering wheel, and turned to look at me. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, after the confrontation and the confession and the shattered illusions, he was asking if I was okay. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, tears of exhaustion and relief and something that felt like hope. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I will be. Eventually." He reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't believe you when you said she was treating you differently. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to go to such extremes to prove your innocence." I shook my head, squeezing his hand back. "You don't have to apologize. You're not the one who did anything wrong, but I didn't protect you," he insisted, his voice cracking. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have stood up for you. Instead, I just let it slide, let you bear the burden alone." I leaned over and rested my head on his shoulder. "We can't change the past, but we can decide what happens next." We went inside, and for the rest of the evening, we moved through the motions of our routine like automatons. We fed the kids, bathed them, read them bedtime stories, and tucked them in with kisses and whispered reassurances. The normalcy of it was grounding, a reminder that no matter what happened with his mother, our family was still intact. After the kids were asleep, we sat in the living room with cups of tea that grew cold in our hands. We talked for hours, dissecting every moment, every conversation, every subtle slight I'd experienced over the years. My husband listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from shock to guilt to something that looked like grief. "I never realized how bad it was," he said finally. "You tried to tell me and I didn't want to see it. I wanted to believe that my mother could be the person I always thought she was." "Denial is a powerful thing," I agreed. I wanted to believe it too. I wanted to believe that if I just tried hard enough, she'd eventually accept me. He reached over and pulled me into his arms, holding me close. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. "I know I don't say it enough, but I love you and I'm not going to let anyone, including my mother, tear us apart." The words were like a balm, soothing wounds I didn't even know I'd been carrying. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment. My mother-in-law called several times, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to defensive to almost desperate. My husband listened to them all but didn't respond. He needed time, he explained, time to process what he'd learned, and decide what kind of relationship he wanted to have with her going forward. I supported his decision, even as I wrestled with my own conflicted feelings. Part of me wanted to cut her off completely, to protect myself and my children from her toxicity. Another part of me, the part that still believed in redemption and second chances, wanted to give her an opportunity to change. The breaking point came when she showed up at our house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing on our porch, her face pale and drawn, a crumpled tissue clutched in her hand. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Please let me explain." I hesitated, every instinct telling me to close the door and walk away, but something in her eyes, something vulnerable and broken, made me step aside. She sat in our living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and she began to talk. She told me about her own mother-in-law, a woman who'd treated her with the same cold disdain she'd shown me. She told me about the years she'd spent trying to earn approval that never came, the resentment that had festered and grown until it had become a poison she didn't know how to expel. "I saw you," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I saw how happy my son was with you, and it reminded me of everything I'd never had. I was jealous and angry and bitter, and I took it out on you." The confession was raw and painful, the kind of admission that comes from a place of absolute desperation. I sat across from her, my own tears falling, and listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't deserve that, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And if there's any way I can make it right, I will." My husband walked into the room, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He'd been listening from the hallway, and I could see the struggle playing out behind his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'm willing to try. If you're willing to change," she nodded, her sobs quieting to hiccups. "I am. I promise I am." The process of rebuilding was slow and delicate. We started with small steps, short visits and phone calls that ended before they could become tense. My mother-in-law made a conscious effort to be kinder, to offer compliments instead of criticisms, to include me in conversations instead of excluding me. It wasn't always easy. Old habits died hard, and there were moments when I could see her slipping back into familiar patterns. But when she did, she caught herself. She'd apologize, genuinely and sincerely, and we'd move forward. The ring, the catalyst for the entire ordeal, was eventually found in a coat pocket she'd forgotten to check. She called me personally to tell me, her voice full of shame and relief. "I'm so sorry," she said again, as she had so many times before. "I should have checked before I accused you." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "It's behind us now." We decided not to tell the rest of the family about the footage or the confrontation. Some truths were better left unspoken, and the public humiliation of exposing her lie would have helped no one. Instead, she told everyone that she'd found the ring in her coat and that she'd been wrong to suspect me. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to restore my reputation. My husband and I continued to see a couples therapist, working through the lingering effects of the experience. We talked about boundaries, communication, and the importance of being a united front. By the time we finished our sessions, our relationship was stronger than it had been before. Looking back on everything, I realized that the experience taught me something profound. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who are hurting the most themselves. My mother-in-law's cruelty was a reflection of her own pain, her own unmet needs, her own inability to accept the love that was offered to her. I'm not saying that excuses what she did. It doesn't. But it helps me understand it, and understanding has made forgiveness possible. We're not best friends, my mother-in-law and I. We probably never will be. But we found a way to coexist, to be part of each other's lives without the constant tension that used to define our relationship. She's learned to respect my place in her son's life, and I've learned to let go of my need for her approval. The ring still sits in her jewelry box, a symbol of the family's history and the wounds that almost tore us apart. But when I look at it now, I don't see the accusation or the betrayal. I see a reminder that even the most broken relationships can be mended if both sides are willing to try. I kept the footage, the recording that had started it all. I keep it in a folder on my phone, a reminder of how low things had gotten and how far we've come. I've never shown it to anyone else, and I don't think I ever will. Some things are meant to stay private, even the things that changed everything. My husband and I still disagree sometimes. We still have arguments and misunderstandings and moments of frustration, but we also have trust, the kind that can only be forged in the fires of adversity. We know now that we can weather any storm as long as we face it together. And my mother-in-law, she's still a work in progress, just like me, just like all of us. But she's trying, and that's what matters. So, am I the asshole for secretly recording my husband's mother after she accused me of stealing her wedding ring? Looking back, I know that what I did was wrong. It was an invasion of privacy, a violation of trust, a step too far. But it was also necessary. It was the only way to expose the truth, to clear my name, to save my marriage and my sanity. I don't regret it. I might have chosen differently if I had to do it all over again, but I don't regret it, because it brought us to this place, this fragile piece we've managed to build out of the wreckage of a relationship that should have been beautiful from the start.